You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we're talking about George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. Here we go.
Dear Diary, it's another day and the zombie apocalypse hasn't happened.
Dear Diary, I'm listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and this is one of your hosts, Bernie Gonzalez. With me today, fellow co-hosts Pete Charbonneau, and Brooke, one of the Stranger Friends, is back. Welcome back, Brooke.
I'm happy to be here.
We're happy you're back because we're talking about a movie that the two of you, I'm kind of jealous, have been lucky enough to see in the theater.
In 1968, George Romero brought us Night of the Living Dead. It became the classic horror film of its time. Now, George Romero brings us the most intensely shocking motion picture experience for all times. Dawn of the Dead. Night of the Living Dead has ended. Dawn of the Dead is here.
It gets up and kills. The people it kills get up and kill.
They must be destroyed on sight.
When there is no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. Dawn of the Dead.
I think a lot of people kind of call this like the quintessential zombie film.
Yeah, some do, or the first Romero film, Night of the Living Dead. But yeah, I would say a lot of people may have even seen this one first, even though it's the second in the Romero world of zombie films.
That's probably an accurate statement. I mean, just personally for me, it's definitely my favorite of all the Romero zombie movies. Definitely one of my all-time, like, regardless of genre, this is, I don't think I would put together a top 10 list, but this is up there as one of my favorite films of all time.
High praise, Pete.
Me too. Definitely on my top 10
Wow.
films. I don't know if it would make my of all films, but it would definitely make the top 25.
Okay. And you're a horror fan, Brooke. So, I mean, that's kind of saying something because you've seen a lot of films, let alone a lot of horror films, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think for the average person, let's say, I've seen a lot of films. Not for like the film lover, but definitely for the average person. Yeah. The average fan.
That's right. The average fan. Love it. All right. You guys mentioned Night of the Living Dead. So I think we probably have to start with that one. The grandpappy of all the zombie films comes out in 1968. So 10 years before Dawn, before my time. I was born in 78. And I did not discover Night of the Living Dead until much later in life, almost till college. And I'll be interested what your takes on Night of the Living Dead is before we kind of talk about Dawn. Because I'll just say for me, it was always a black and white film growing up that I had heard of. But because it was black and white, I always kind of dismissed it. It felt old. It felt something like maybe my father would have watched and enjoyed at the time when I was growing up. I want to see Halloween and Friday the 13th. I wanted to see the slashers. That's what caught my attention. It wasn't something like Carnival of Souls, 13 Ghosts, and Vincent Price, or even Night of the Living Dead. So it's not until much later I got an appreciation for Night of the Living Dead, which then kind of opened the door to check out things like Dawn and Day. But Brooke, starting with you, do you remember how, you first watched Night of the Living Dead?
I want to say I did watch at least parts of it before I saw Dawn of the Dead, but I didn't really watch it in full and really pay attention and love it until after I saw Dawn of the Dead. Because I remember I was a big horror fan even when I was a kid, and I was about 13, and my mom's boyfriend at the time was a horror fan. He loved Night of the Living Dead, and he kept telling me, you have to watch Night of the Living Dead, you're gonna love it. And I was like, oh, it's black and white, just like you were saying. And then I saw Dawn of the Dead at one point, and I was about, I want to say 23. It was one of those, I don't know if you remember when IFC had the horror Friday nights, and I was just like kind of alone in the house. And I remember my ex-husband was at this recording studio, and he would record bands late at night. So I'd get bored on Friday nights, and I'd be like, oh, I got to watch something. So I would pick out horror movies. So I saw Dawn of the Dead, loved it, absolutely, fell into this total love with this movie, and I was like, I've got to watch more zombie movies. So then I went back and watched Night of the Living Dead. And even to this day, it is hard for me to say which one I like better, but I always go back to Dawn of the Dead just because that's the one that caught my attention, brought into the spotlight for me Night of the Living Dead. But now I love Night of the Living Dead just as much. The first horror movie I saw was Fright Night when I was like, I was way too young, 6 or 7 or something. My dad was like downstairs and I watched it. So I really always liked horror movies, but I never really watched zombie movies. I didn't really know like what the deal was with those because I would see them Return, which is the one from the 90s, Return of the Living Dead. So I had seen that one and okay, what is this? What are these zombie movies? I thought they were ridiculous. But he's like, no, the real zombie movie you have to watch is Night of the Living Dead. That's the original, and that's where these all come from.
Pete, do you remember Night of the Living Dead, first time watching it?
When you brought it up, I was thinking about it, and I don't know the first time that I saw it. And like Brooke, it definitely came after I saw Dawn of the Dead. Might have been after I saw Day of the Dead as well. But I mean, I always knew of it, and I had seen clips. I want to say that there were clips in like that horror compilation movie Terror in the Isles that came out in the 80s.
At last, a terrifying movie where you don't have to wait for the good parts. Because it's nothing but good parts. All the very best parts from the greatest terror films of all time. Terror in the Isles. It's only a movie, but it's more than enough. Rated R. Starts Friday, October 26th at select theaters.
I certainly knew enough and I knew what the story was, but I don't think, like both of you have said, like it was an old black and white movie, you know, after kind of being grabbed by the shoulders, having seen Dawn for the first time, that was such a visceral experience for me on many different levels at the age that I saw it at, which was probably like early teens. I think going back to something that, you know, was considered a lot tamer, wasn't something at the time that I was interested in, but I eventually did seek it out and I have seen it. I've seen that one in the theater as well. That might have been like a Riff Tracks thing that they had done around Halloween a couple of years ago. I went to see that. That was a fun experience too.
Brains. Oh, gross. Joanne's eating a bug.
The stars of Mystery Science Theater 3000 are back with Riff Tracks Live.
Recoiling in terror from this guy is perfectly reasonable response.
Just in time for Halloween, join the guys as they riff Night of the Living Dead on Thursday, October 24th only.
This place is boarded up pretty solid now.
Windows directly behind me notwithstanding.
Tickets on sale now at fathomevents.com.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously enjoy it for what it is. I enjoy it for what it started. I was fascinated with the making of it and how, you know, we'll probably get into some of the history of this at some point with Romero's filmmaking and, you know, and some of the mistakes that were made with Night of the Living Dead in terms of distribution that he was determined not to repeat going forward because, you know, as many listeners may know, pretty much anyone can churn out a copy of Night of the Living Dead at this point because it's public domain. And that was unfortunately, you know, an oversight by some inexperienced, you know, filmmakers, which I don't have any, you know, I have nothing but empathy for people that, you know, for what they were trying to do at the time and just not thinking through all of the business side of things. They wanted to make something, you know, artistic and creative. So the whole history surrounding this genre and how it got kickstarted in the late 60s with Night of the Living Dead and where it all kind of filling in the blanks after seeing Dawn of the Dead and like, okay, well now Day of the Dead, now I go back to Night of the Living Dead and the other ones. Even Tom Savini's remake of Night of the Living Dead, probably unnecessary, but my ubiquitous cousin Mark and I went and saw that in the theater when it was released and we enjoyed it, you know, for what it was. I'm like, it was kind of cool to see that story reimagined and in color with some upgraded gore effects from the master Tom Savini. So it's an interesting world to live in, and we'll get into this a bit more. I was thrilled, absolutely thrilled, when Brooke and I got to go see it at the Carolina Theater, the 45th anniversary rescreening of Dawn of the Dead. Something that didn't think I might ever experience in my lifetime would be to see that movie in the theater, and so glad that I did. Have you ever given thought to what you might do in the situation where society is collapsing due to a zombie plague? Like, would you hole up in a mall, or how do you think you might fare during the zombie apocalypse?
I mean, after seeing Dawn of the Dead, I would. I don't know if I would have thought of that before. I don't know what I would do. I always say, like, I think I would freeze and not know what to do. But when it comes down to it, I think my character, I don't give myself enough credit. And I think I probably would figure it out. I don't know if I would get as far as the main characters get, but I think I would make it pretty far. I think I'd make it halfway through the movie. How about that?
And I want to get into, because having seen it again now, I hadn't watched it in quite a while, and before we caught it in the theater, and I was really thinking a lot about the character arcs in this one for the 4 leads. So we can get into this a little bit later, but I'm curious, both of your takes on the growth or perhaps regression of some of these some of our main characters, who I will say are all, well, not all, 3 of them are very likable. Stephen, I mean, that guy, he fucks up so much stuff in this movie. He's
Flyboy.
Flyboy. Bye-bye.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
I think he meant well. That's the thing about that character is I think he meant well. Even when, of course, he does the proposal and what are you doing? But he doesn't know how to read things almost. Like he's just like overzealous. He's like, okay, well, I'm in the normal world, I would propose at this point because she's gonna have my baby, and like he just doesn't get it.
That's very interesting. I took it as his character was kind of the one that was trying like hell to maintain his life before, and so it was like, whatever I can do that gives us a sense of normalcy in a scenario that was clearly not normal. Like I feel like Fran does probably the most growth out of all of them. Roger regresses because he kind of, like you said, he gets overconfident and he kind of snaps.
I'm glad that you guys brought up Steven, especially what you said, Brooke, because I think he's the guy that he says something to Fran at some point where he's like, this place is perfect.
Yeah.
When they do the scene where they're getting comfortable in the mall, they're playing dress up. And it's like a scene that you would see in another movie where these characters are having fun with the fact that they have full access to all this clothes. So he would have gone into the jewelry store and probably picked the most expensive wedding ring and brought that to that dinner to propose, unaware of the fact that he's still trying to go by all these norms. Like you said, Brooke, she's pregnant with my child, so this is the part where I should propose. And this is how we should do this. And it should be romantic, being oblivious to the fact that outside of that mall, the world is falling apart. Even little scenes like where he and Peter are posing in front of the camera when they rob the bank, when they have the money, as if money has any value anymore. The spam is worth more than the money that they have. Yet this guy still, like, when the bikers come in, he gets pissed off. He's like, with the walkie-talkie looking off a railing, you're not going to take my stuff. Like he
fucks up the whole thing for everyone.
Absolutely. Yes. But he's so centered on the stuff, the materialism of it. Fran, like, we're going to play husband and wife here, and these are going to be our friends, and it's going to be normal. It's like, no, the undead are literally walking all around. You're going to have to start growing. And that's where I think 100% Pete, Fran, whether she is a smarter character, which I would argue I think she is, and certainly circumstances have brought her in the fact that she's pregnant. It's like, yeah, her learning curve is very steep. She's like, no, I understand what I'm doing. Also, I get the limitations of these guys. So give me a gun, show me how to fly a helicopter, because maybe you guys may not be here to the end, but I'm going to protect myself and my unborn kid.
Yeah. And when she brings that up, Peter's like down with it. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. But like the fact that none of them thought of this before, and she's the one to be like, one of us has to know how to fly in case something happens to you. Because I feel like Steven at the start, because he is a pilot and he can get them out of the city, that's his contribution to this cobbled together group. Because I think he's stuck in wanting to have things be the way they were. Definitely a dick to Fran in many points, like when she's just trying to ask for normal things. Like even when she says, I want to learn how to fly the helicopter, he throws like a fit. He gets mad when she rejects his proposal, which again, like in that situation, like who's saying yes to that? Stephen, all that aside, is like he's a fascinating character, because when this film came out in the late 70s, in a lot of ways, he embodies kind of like that male wannabe macho image, even though he's not really that macho, but like, it's like, this is the way things are. I'm the provider. I'm going to do this, this, and this, and you will be my wife and all that. But like, he can't really provide for her. And Fran, I think, certainly at the beginning, she's like taking charge in that TV studio as everything's going to shit.
Franny, get the new list of rescue stations Charlie's receiving on the emergency.
Rescue stations.
Half of those are inoperative as of now.
Charlie, these are rescue stations. We can't send people to inoperative rescue stations.
We've had old information on the air for the last 12 hours.
She's pulling off the names of the rescue stations that are out of date, and she gets yelled at for it. And they're like, "Who's doing this?" And she just yells right in. She's like, "I'm the one who did it. They're out of date. We're sending people to die." And so she's got like this agency, even though the literally opening shot of the film is her kind of like exhaust leaning up against that very red carpeted wall. She knows what her role is in that moment and in that studio. And then I think you see her kind of stumble a bit as everything starts to fall apart. And she's a little bit, it takes her some time to kind of get back up to speed. And like, she's with like these three men, like two SWAT guys that are like, we're going to do this, this, and this and go. And you're not coming with us until you can learn how to handle yourself. But she does eventually learn how to handle herself. And I feel like her growth out of all of them is the most pronounced and probably the biggest one, just because of where she comes from, where she's kind of got that agency, loses it a bit. But then at the end, if not for her, like no one's getting out of there alive. So again, seeing this after not having watched it for many years through an older set of eyes from when I watched it when I was a kid, it took on, way more depth and a lot more meaning for me that I really appreciate. And I think that's the mark of any great film, is that you can watch it at different stages of your life and get different things out of it in those different stages.
You're still here.
They're after us. They know we're still in here.
They're after the place. They don't know why. They just remember that they want to be in here.
What the hell are they?
They're us, that's all. There's no more room in hell.
What?
It's something my granddaddy used to tell us. You know Macumba? Voodoo. Granddad was a priest in Trinidad. He used to tell us, when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth.
With a lot of zombie films, like they're almost made, whether I guess the filmmakers know it or not, to be a mirror to us, right? To humanity. And some of the better ones are almost more what humanity chooses to do or not to do. Do you think in the times that you've seen this, do you think your perspective has changed about Dawn of the Dead?
Yeah, definitely. I kind of revisit it every couple of years. And then, I saw it, I think it was 2023 that I saw it in 3D, which was an interesting experience because that film does not need to be in 3D. But also I was alone in a movie theater, and like that's not something I do a lot. I think that might have been the first movie I went to by myself. I know that sounds sad because I was in my early 40s, but I'm just kind of learning to do more things on my own. And I was like, well, I'm going to go see this. I couldn't find anyone to go with me, and I wanted to see it because it's one of my favorite movies. And I did pick up a few things, definitely with everything that Pete was saying as far as like the character of Fran. I always want to say Galen because that's her name in real life, and that's my mother's name, and that's not a common name, so I always want to say Galen. Yeah, I caught a lot of things there, and how they handled certain things as far as like their different personalities, like we were saying before, like how one person kind of gets sort of overconfident. I didn't see, one thing I did think about at that time and this time again is like, I didn't see a lot of change in the Peter character. He's kind of like more of a stable character. Like, he's just kind of solid and he's just always that way. Like he's always the reasonable, rational guy who is going to fix things. And it made me think about like their logic versus their emotion, especially this last time I saw it, because in my line of work in my company, we're doing something called a culture index survey, which Pete has actually taken it. But what it does is it kind of tells you about 6 different aspects of your personality, and one of them is logic. And if you have a high logic score, you're a very logical person. And I think Peter is obviously a very logical character. And then the lower your score, or if you're in the middle, just the lower it goes, you have more emotion. So you base your decisions, you base your actions more on your emotions. And I think that Fran actually happens to have probably I would say out of 10, she's probably like a 7 or 8 as far as that goes. And Steven was very emotional. He based things on emotion. He based things on, okay, the way things used to be and the way things made me feel. And that's how I'm going to react. I'm going to take over and be the man and learn how to fly this plane because that's what I need to do. It's all based on emotion. So I would say he's pretty low, like maybe like a 2 or a 3. I don't know about 2, but definitely pretty low. So it did make me think about that, logic versus emotion, and who has more of a autonomous personality where they're just going to kind of take over and see the big picture, and who has more of a, okay, I'm going to take direction. I think they all have a pretty autonomous part about them, but I would say definitely Steven again had lower autonomy. So it made me think about all of that and personalities and what makes people tick. And I did see that before, but I think I saw when I watched it when I was younger, more of the big picture stuff like society, which is the obvious stuff, what it's claiming about society and how we're all zombies to material objects and consumerism. But that to me is almost too obvious. Like when you actually take a microscope and look at the individual characters, it's so much more interesting.
I like that viewpoint, especially again, like the conversations I think that we have are the best ones that aren't, one, just a regurgitation of Wikipedia, but 2, when it's your perspective on a movie. That culture survey is interesting because now you brought up Peter, and now I see him as every Friday night the police officers get together and they go out to a bar for drinks. I can see Roger being the officer that maybe has a few too many, and the guy who owns the bar, obviously can't kick him out because he's a cop, but his other buddies drag him out because maybe he doesn't have someone to go home to. And he's a little reckless. Peter's the guy who leaves at 8:13, and everyone's like, Peter, come on, stick around, have another one. And he's like, in his very cool Ken Foray voice, no, guys, I'm going home right now. And then he
pick up suckers.
And then he goes to the grocery store and buys yogurt. He's so practical and functional. But then when you were talking about being autonomous, they're literally having a romantic dinner. He's so nice and generous enough to be I'm going to serve you guys, and I'm going to serve you guys drinks and food. And then he's like, peace out. I'm going to give you guys a moment because I think I have enough emotional intelligence to be this is not the part where I just sit here and be a creep. I'm going to go more in my friend's loss. I'm okay also being alone.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really interesting lens to look at their characters, especially when you look at what they were before.
Well, I also there's a subtle change. I don't know if it's a subtle change, but the film gives you a subtle switch from the beginning with the Roger and Peter, which again, I think their relationship and Steven and Fran's relationship in this movie are just incredibly interesting. The bromance between Roger and Peter, I always saw that and felt that. But again, watching it again years later, it just got to hit home even more that, considering that they didn't know each other at the start of the film, but they formed this real bond. And like you said, Bernie, at that scene where he ducks out from Fran and Steven's dinner to kind of just go pay homage to his friend and drink some champagne and pour one out for him was, it was touching and it was poignant. What I was going to say, the beginning of the movie where you're introduced, again, if you've grown up watching movies, Roger is kind of introduced as the level-headed member of this SWAT team. You've got all this chaos going on around them in this, very, tense tenement building as they kind of go to do the raid, and there's tons of zombies in there. And when we're first introduced to Peter, one, he's masked, but you can tell here's this big black guy who just shot another SWAT member who deserved it. But still, like, it's like, okay, what's going on? And Roger's the one that's always kind of reining things in. There's like that one scene, well, right before they go in, where he's talking to the recruit, like, when things pop off, just keep your head, don't worry about it. And then he literally is shot in the head before he can do anything.
You're Rod, right?
Rod Tucker.
How the hell come we stick these low-life bastards in these big-ass fancy hotels anyway? Shit, man, this is better than I got. Hey, you ain't gonna talk them out of here. You gotta blow them out.
Just stay cool, okay? When we go in there, don't pop off, all right?
I'll be okay.
Come on, let's get on with it. This is a waste of my time. Let's go, let's go!
And so when there's that subtle twist later, Brooke, like you said, like Peter is kind of like the stable line throughout the whole thing. Like he doesn't waver too high or too low. He's always just kind of like, this is what I'm doing. Even at the end when he's like, get out of here. I don't want to go. It's that subtle twist that I found interesting because you're kind of set up to be like, okay, well, Roger's going to be like our prototypical protagonist here. And then, he slowly loses his mind in this scenario where society is falling apart and everyone kind of reacts differently. Peter kind of maintains that line. Roger loses his mind to, unfortunately, his own detriment. Fran, like I said, dips, but then comes back strong. And Steven he's just hoping to hold on to something that no longer exists. And I think it's a very interesting character study for all four of them throughout the movie.
To stick with that piece beat, the whole character thing, I was going to ask you, Brooke, all right, so see how angry you get at characters, because sometimes I'll get really angry at characters when they're doing dumb things. And dumb things I define by anything that I wouldn't do, because I wouldn't do dumb things, obviously, in a movie. Yeah, at least I wouldn't think so. But the part where they're doing like the truck convoy and they're doing something that seems really smart. And we'll talk about this a little later because there's this whole like escapist fun fantasy thing about being stuck in a mall. Mm-hmm. But then there's like the practicality of how you would secure a mall with a lot of entrances. So when they do the truck thing, there's that part of me that's like, oh my God, this is great. Like they're so smart. They're going to do something that's going to protect them. This is good. Roger, why are you being a dumbass? Stop fooling around. Get your shit together. When you see scenes like that, Brooke, like how do you feel when you see characters like that, Brooke?
Oh, it annoys me. Yeah, it actually really annoyed me this time more than other times too. So I don't know why that was, but maybe it's something with like my life experiences and issues I've had to deal with as of late, but just like people like not being able to control their anger or their like confidence or cockiness or whatever it is, like that really irritates me now. Like, and yeah, it made me really disappointed in him because when he's first introduced as a character, you're like, oh wow, this guy is going to be part of the hero team, and yeah, he knows what he's doing, and then you just kind of slowly see, and then when that happens, it's done, and as soon as he starts acting that way, he's the next one that's going down. And it also makes you see your own imperfections too, because it makes me think, oh gosh, do I do that? Or
how are you at hot wiring a truck?
Bad. Yeah, no, I would be inside.
Well, I don't want to backtrack too much, but as we kind of got into that character discussion, I am curious. Brooke, you shared like when you first saw Dawn of the Dead, but Bernie, what about you? What was your first? Do you have a first memory of seeing Dawn?
Yeah. Time? When I went away to college, because growing up, my folks didn't really let me watch horror movies. And once I got away to college, I ran to the video store and I went like A to Z. I rented everything I could. Once I saw Night of the Living Dead, then it felt like I need to watch everything else that this director has done. And Dawn was always the movie that I really liked, again, just because of that escapist fantasy element, especially growing up in the 80s and how malls just were a prominent part of growing up. That's where you met your friends, and maybe that's where you found a little bit of freedom away from parents because you could kind of escape to like the security of the mall. There was always something neat about that because like while the farmhouse in Night of the Living Dead is also kind of neat, there's something really scary and isolated about that, where you really need to have people around you that are going to help you survive. In the mall, escapist math, so it doesn't always add up, But you're like, oh, well, there's a gun shop in here, and there's like a Dick's Sporting Goods, and there's all this stuff that presumably should help me survive as long as I don't act like an idiot like Roger. And if I don't do that, like I might give myself a fighting chance. I love that they like cleaned up the place, and yeah, the place would smell. That completely makes sense. There's something really neat that I've always liked about like the procedural aspect of this movie. There's a book called I Am Legend that was written by Richard Matheson, and it's been like the Omega Man, the Vincent Price movie, Last Man on Earth, the Will Smith one, I Am Legend as well. The one thing that some of them miss that I like from the original story, documenting things in like a diary format. And there's something neat about that, because I always remember how that character, he's like, hey, I went out today and was able to get like 3 bottles of rainwater, and I was able to find a bar of soap. There's something about that that's really appealing to me. That's why with Dawn, when they kind of break it down, it's like, we got to secure the entrances, but then also like, we're going to have to clean up this place and get rid of the body so it doesn't stink. And now like, we're going to have to fortify, and it's the mall. This is awesome.
So you wouldn't splurge on fancy dinner at the Brown Derby in the mall?
You know, but that's the other part too. Like there's something about this film that they get into like a certain like idleness. Like after they've protected themselves, right? And they have everything. Maybe that's the thing you were saying, bro. People equal zombies. If we were in a scenario like that, some of us would hustle to protect ourselves and fortify ourselves, make sure we're safe. But what happens after we're all safe? Okay, would we just play dress up, drive the golf carts around the mall, and like maybe drink a little too much and do some stupid things? Someone would shoot out of the skylight and just be like, ha ha ha, like we're just having fun. It's like, yeah, well, what else do we have to do? Are we just gonna go into Walden Books and read? After a while, you're just like, is this our existence? So there's also that part, I think, too, Pete. Yeah, I don't know what I do, but I would like to think I would keep some sanity. But then I see movies like this now, I think, as I get older, and I'm like, I don't know, would I? Maybe I could hold it together for a while, but maybe not forever.
I don't think anyone could. And when we're talking about malls and all this conversation, I'm thinking of all these films in the 70s and 80s that were shot or had big memorable scenes in malls, like Mannequin. I mean, that movie shot in a mall mostly. There's a lot of films where even if it's not the main shooting scene, they don't do the main shooting scenes in the mall, like Mannequin and Dawn of the Dead. There's a lot of movies that have memorable scenes in malls, like Valley Girl, when they're in the mall, you know.
They broke into the mall for the wildest all-night party of their lives.
Get that meat.
But you're never alone. In the chopping mall.
What's that?
Robot blood. Chopping mall. Where shopping costs you an arm and a leg.
Never forget Chopping Mall.
Commando. The Commando and Chopping Mall is the same. There's like that one mall in LA or whatever in Southern California that was like used for a bunch of those movies.
With the elevator and that kind of that middle area.
Yep. And then even, you look at something like Stranger Things. Was it the season 3 or 4 of Stranger Friends? Where
that's right.
Kind of starts out like it's all about the mall culture. It was like what a fascinating, bizarre cultural piece that I think it like in the 80s we would have just assumed would go on forever, and it's how like malls are now just kind of like they're like a relic of the past almost. It's really bizarre.
Well, they're not really. They're just different. Now it's just a big strip in the U Drive, which is actually worse. It's totally not as community based because you're not going in there and like hanging out. You're going into one store, and then if it's too far down that way, you're going to drive and get in the car.
No Orange Julius.
And no cookies. So that's not fun.
I'm surprised that this hasn't happened, but like I know that they have like zombie runs and things like that. I'm surprised, and maybe they have, we just haven't heard about it. I'm surprised no one's tried to rent out one of these like abandoned malls and done like some kind of zombie run through that. I think that would be a blast, especially for us Gen Xers to.
That's it, right?
Any of our 26 listeners out there are.
if any of them are real estate developers and or escape room billionaires, give us a shout out. I think we have a call.
1-800-FAN2FAN. That's 1-800-FAN, the number 2 fan.
That's right.
Leave us a voicemail.